that he has been having he has extensive experience in the international arena. Having been a legislator for 10 years, he will ensure, and it is expected that he will ensure that there is a constructive form and functional relationship between his office and Parliament. He is experienced in law and appreciates the seriousness of the requirements of the Constitution. Trustworthy and loyal is another attribute that has been put forth for the now new elect Deputy President, Kithure Kindiki, that he is a focused leader with a long history of working with the President. Now, the other voices also say, unlike the former Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, Kindiki has stood with the President at the most trying times without of course, faltering. They say he has defended the President in his personal capacity, as well as being a member of his cabinet and a trusted confidant. In the run-up to the last elections, if we can look in hindsight, the new President or Deputy President-elect Kithure Kindiki was the favorite pick of the Kenya Kwanza Brigade. And as you heard in the analysis prior to this historic moment, the many Kenya Kwanza Brigade argued that they were disappointed when he was not picked to be the running mate. Well, finally, another attribute that is coming out strongly on why now we have Professor Kithure Kindiki approved for Deputy President position is that he's a patriot and a servant leader. Outlined is that despite his personal decision to no longer participate in politics after the fallout over the running mate pick, Kindiki answered the call to support the President, Ruto, form government and serve his country, hence his service as the CS Interior. They argue that he is a true patriot and servant leader, selflessly putting God and the country first. Other arguments that put him as a positive candidate to move the country forward working with the President, William Ruto, is that he has a national outlook and has demonstrated even through his docket that he can serve all of Kenya. Of course, they're giving a case in point that he looks beyond ethnic or regional concerns. If you also followed the arguments by the National Assembly and the accusers of the former Deputy President, one of the big reasons he's out of office is that he had some tribal and ethnic prejudices. Finally, the now new Deputy President-elect, Professor Kithure Kindiki, has been praised for being a disciplined worker. They say this is evidenced by how he has run the Ministry of Interior with courage and a firm hand. We'll continue to give you this profile in detail, but of course we're looking at what else is going to happen to the country after that. But remember, we'll be looking at this with a professional in studio just to give us a bit of his understanding of what has happened, and just to again remind you that in the National Assembly they have just taken but a short breather. We're expecting, according to the Speaker of the National Assembly, that they will resume at 2:30 p.m. Those proceedings as well will come to you shortly. But I'm here with John Swaka, who is a lawyer.
Thank you.
I mean, it has been quite an interesting year to start with,
yes,
let alone a week. Friday is here.
Yes.
Without diluting anything that you have seen, what would be your opening remarks or your overview of what has happened? Quite historic in the country today.
Quite historic, and you can actually see the numbers that actually went into approving, or rather voting for the will-be designate DP. That basically demonstrates two things. First and foremost, that the nominee is basically acceptable by Parliament, as opposed to the ex-DP, Deputy President, whom you saw that there was a lot of acrimony with parliamentarians. And one of the things that are very critical for the working of the presidency, when I talk about the presidency, I mean the president and the deputy, is that working relationship. You heard the deputy president, the outgoing deputy president, saying that it's come a time when I cannot be able to relate to the president. I'm not aware of his schedules. I've been removed from a WhatsApp group. I do not know where the president is going and all that. You could tell that the chemistry has come to an end. And just as you rightly put it, the DP designate has all the attributes demonstrating that they have been one and they've been in touch with the president all along, from the time that he had been considered as a running mate. And even when he was not selected, he still said that I'll still push on and support him and the DP that he had, and the running mate that he had settled for.
Yes.
And we have seen him actually being there for the president and for the government, both thick and thin, during the Gen Z demonstrations, and even whenever he's called upon to come to parliament to answer questions as to national security and all that. He has been there. He's had that rapport with the parliamentarians, had that rapport with the president. So I believe that the president wanted somebody whom they can seamlessly work together. It's
interesting because in his capacity serving as the CS and looking back even in 2023, where a number of surveys were done, Kenyans were asked, who do you think is doing really well as a CS? Even prior to the president's address to his CSs saying you need to be in touch with your ministry, Professor Kindiki came out as the best CS at that time. What would be your remarks in as far as him being on top of his game, even as the deputy president? There have been, reservations or conversations around you could be a technical person, less political, but when it comes to the deputy president, what are we looking at, and does he then fit that office in your observation?
The deputy president, just like the word insinuates deputy,
yes,
you basically deputize. You're a principal assistant of the president, and so you must be ready and willing to fit into his schedule, to fit into his program, and to be able to take up all the responsibility that the president assigns you.
Yes.
And so it's both, of course, a political position, but also one that comes with a lot of professionalism, because then you cannot, as a deputy, try to outshine your master. You cannot, as a deputy, then try to outdo your master. So it means that when you look at the political angle, he has to abide and he has to humble himself and work together with the directives or with the directions that the president, who is now his boss,
yes,
and with whom, of course, the deputy president now will be an agent to. He has to be able to seamlessly fit into the protocol of the president. And we have seen from the recent weeks, we've seen issues being brought up that the deputy president was holding up press conferences after the president, the ex-deputy president, the former deputy president. We had to get accustomed to the word former. When you look at that, you realize that one of the sources of conflict within the presidency was that kind of attitude and character. And so for the incoming deputy president, it will be very incumbent upon him and very instructive that he both puts on the political hat and also the professional hat, because he brings a lot of expertise onto the table. He brings a lot of professionalism on the table, with which now he can be able to support the president and, of course, advise the president equally in a manner that benefits the entire nation. Let
me just hold you still with me in studio. We're coming back to you shortly. But I'm also joined virtually by an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Willis Otieno. It's very good to see you. Good afternoon. Thank you for creating time to be here. Quite historic for the country, but also we're looking at the constitutionality of the matter, and Kenyans seek to hear your advice legally. We know for sure that the courts, not once, not twice, declared that they will not interfere with the process of impeaching the former Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua. But moving with speed, because what we have here is that it's very risky then to have a vacancy in this position or prolonged for a period of time. Hence, the speed at which the National Assembly has acted, so has the Senate, particularly the Parliament. But where do we place then the process after this? The role of the IEBC, we don't have a fully constituted electoral, boundaries commission. So where are we going next? And is it necessary that we also understand what the CEO can do and what we need a whole commission to do? Is it going to come in between what has then been started and fast-tracked? Willis.
Thank you very much. The first point about the IEBC is that the role of IEBC is to determine the eligibility of a nominee to hold public office. And in particular, that role is normally performed by the returning officer for that particular election. The returning officer for presidential elections is the chairman of IEBC. And somebody will raise an issue that the CEO of IEBC cannot usurp the roles of the chairperson and decide to play that role and determine if the nominee is eligible to be appointed or to be nominated as deputy president. That role is the role of the chairperson, the returning officer, and William Ruto's failure and delays in constituting the IEBC will catch up with him on this particular score. But be that as it may, I don't think this process is being driven as a legal process. This is more of a political process. William Ruto needs his deputy president, and he has to get it. And he will do everything possible. If you look at the conduct of the parliamentary proceedings, they are all moving at supersonic speed to achieve an already determined outcome, to have a deputy president in office by the date 20th of October.
That is Mashujaa Day. But of course, we're looking yes, and the reason why I think we also have you here is to look at some of the anticipated cases that might come to the court and might end up in court. One of the concerns coming in is that what is expected is that a legal brief may be in the process, and the argument here is that there will also be an ESCC, which seemed to hint that the file on the KEMSA issue was not really closed. If you followed the cross-examination and re-examination in Senate, the issues around ESCC and KEMSA might be something that might be challenged in court if the former deputy president then decides to move to court. The courts declared that they're open for the deputy president's legal team to proceed there once the Senate, of course, ended their constitutional mandate. What would you then speak on these particular cases that might be coming up in court?
You know, in terms of the court process, it's within the rights of the deputy president or other Kenyans in that for that matter, who have a responsibility under Article 3 to defend and protect the Constitution, to raise these issues before a court of law. Because the truth of the matter is that we are going through what is called a political process, not a legal process. But the law had assumed that we will be able to have sufficient mechanisms through which, in achieving the political objective, the law will guide it. That process that's provided by the law has not been followed. There was glaring irregularities that were committed, breaches of the Constitution, the rights to a fair hearing that accorded to the former Deputy President Gachagua. And the Senate itself did not even understand what its role was, because it was meant to conduct an investigation within 10 days and report back to the plenary of the Senate. And in that process of reporting back, the Deputy President Gachagua ought to have been given an opportunity to appear in person and to be heard. Those are constructs of the Constitution, and the Senate ought to have given him that particular opportunity. In this particular instance, he was not given that opportunity, and the end result was that his rights have been violated. And the courts will consider all these questions. The only problem we may have is that the courts also may decide to adopt the well-known doctrine of judicial restraint or avoidance, where they may decide that, okay, we see it, you have a good legal case, but in this particular instance, we will not exert jurisdiction, we will not be part of a political conversation. We leave it to the politicians to decide this particular issue. As it is, the politicians have decided Rigathi Gachagua must go, and it seems Kindiki must come in to satisfy William Ruto.
Interestingly, and of course, there are arguments that are saying the courts upgraded themselves. Nowadays, you can actually, appear, virtually. And so the questions were, even so, the deputy president, former deputy president, was reported ill by his lawyer, senior counsel Paul Mwite. You're saying then that it is important that the Senate should still have accorded him a chance to respond and to defend himself as is expected. So you're saying this, just for clarity, will be a major reason for challenge in the corridors of justice. Just for clarification again, Willis.
Yes, of course, it will be a strong ground to challenge the Senate proceedings, because they did not give him an opportunity to be heard, and the dictates of the Constitution were not adhered to when it came to this particular impeachment. And the courts should be invited to consider this question and even provide guidance for future processes for the impeachment of a deputy president. William Ruto has shown you that he's somebody who is capable of impeaching a deputy president, and it is important that the courts clarify that and give us the parameters within which an impeachment should be done, and the legal process ought to be followed for future references.
All right, now I'll be looking at a quick court order quickly, but we're seeing that everyone has a right to not incriminate himself. There must have been things that the defense was aware of. This is what some of the arguments are, and that under cross-examination may have been very incriminating. What is your thoughts on this incriminating concern in what we saw happening in Senate in as far as re-examination and cross-examination is concerned? Is it really a concern in your legal lens?
In my legal eyes, it's a concern. It's a concern that is legitimate.
All right.
And it's a concern that needs to be considered by the courts so that we create clarity on how these processes ought to be conducted.
All right. Now, quickly, I just want to look at a court order because you're mentioning that quite a number of issues are rising up quickly. And on this stay order that I'm opening right now, and what I'm looking at is that in the High Court of Kenya at Nairobi City, we're looking at the Milimani Law Court's case number is quite lengthy. I know Akili and lawyer here, you understand that. But the citation is that Rigathi Gachagua versus the State Law Office and Senate and 3 others. Now, I'll just speak quickly, part 3, that in the meantime, due to the issues raised in the petition and application, the agency demonstrated a conservatory order is hereby issued staying implementation of the resolution by the Senate upholding the impeachment charges against the petitioner, the deputy, of course, President of Kenya, including the appointment of his replacement until 24th October 2024, when the matter will be mentioned before the bench to be appointed by the Chief Justice for the appropriate orders and action. We're looking at 24th October. According to this court order, Willis, as I almost conclude with you, are we looking at somebody breaching or not obeying this stay order at this point?
I mean, if the stay orders come out, I've not heard about that, but that will be breaking news. That an order has been issued, then it means that at this particular point, the name of Kithure Kindiki must be put on abeyance. He must call his horses, and Rigathi Gachagua in the interim should be allowed to continue serving as a deputy president, because also we do not envisage a vacancy. It is only that now we have a process that is leading us to a new deputy president. And if the court has stayed the appointment of a new one, then the state has an obligation to obey the orders that have been issued by the courts. And if they purport not to obey that particular order, then it will lead us to a legal crisis and a quagmire. And it will augur very badly for William Ruto and his acolytes when the petition itself now comes for further hearing. The person who will be holding that office will be holding that office illegitimately and will not be able to commit the Republic of Kenya in any endeavor.
Okay, if you could just stay with us shortly, let me hear from John Swaka, who's a lawyer here as well. And I have just read this court order to you. And I know we are hardly on the 20th yet. We're just anticipating that in a few hours. But there we go. So if this court order is out in public, and then we know that there's a political process, and as rightfully put by Wakili, there is that contention between political process that has to move, and we need a deputy president because the position cannot be vacant for as long as we wish. It has to be filled. People need to work. But on the other side, there's a stay order. So who is who? And as you said, we're looking at a quagmire at this point.
Yeah, as you rightly say, it is a political process. And of course, the political process must now be tampered with legal provisions of the law. And the court having issued an order of stay, there are 2 scenarios.
All right.
The executive may say, listen, we can no longer stay. We can no longer wait for anything more. This gentleman has gone through parliament, has been approved. They may proceed and have him take over the position of the DP. So as this position is filled up and government business continues. Of course, if they were to obey the court order, then it means that the position that was earlier we revert back to that particular position. And that means that then whatever resolution that the Senate came up with is stayed. So if it is stayed, it means that Deputy President, the former Deputy President, remains the Deputy President until the termination of this matter.
Now, okay. Now, let us now look at it this way. Is it then that this court order has been overtaken by events?
It could be argued that it's been overtaken by events. Okay. Why? Because already we have a name that was already submitted to Parliament and has been approved by Parliament.
And submitted by the sitting president.
By the sitting president.
William Ruto.
And he says that this is the person that I want to be my assistant.
Yes.
And Parliament has overwhelmingly embraced it and have approved it. And so now it remains to see whether now the president will proceed ahead and to have him sworn into office.
Interesting, because there are other court, scenarios here that are being looked at. Perhaps if I could just read this one quickly because of time. They're saying there was a decision for silence from the chief witness. That is what they're putting here, as well as his legal representatives, that they are putting it as intentional silence, saying they had no instructions. There was euphemistic. Right, euphemistic. They're saying that particular saying that there's no instructions to speak is euphemistic to say that they had no intention of making any further arguments that may jeopardize their client further. And they're saying it was a very smart move on their part. So their argument by these particular legal voices is that Gachagwa's team might have an upper hand in court, perhaps, because, like Willie said, he wasn't given a chance, really, to defend himself. Do you share the same sentiments?
No, perhaps I'll depart from that a bit, because you see, it was, if anything, the person who was prejudiced then was the National Assembly, because it was a time of the National Assembly to have him cross-examined. And it is through the cross-examination that they intended to do that will have exposed him more if there was a case against him. But his failure is non-availability at Parliament for purposes of that cross-examination. Of course, on medical grounds, as cited by the lawyers, raises two fundamental questions. One, who was prejudiced? Is it him, or is it then the prosecution, which is the National Assembly? Remember, the National Assembly, who are prosecuting the matter, had already presented all their witnesses. And the witnesses were subjected to very intense cross-examination. So it was a time of the chief witness to the defense to be able to be cross-examined.
Yes.
And then, of course, he did not show up. Now, you must understand that this process has legal timelines. There is no way, and there's no provision for its extension. And, I mean, unless now we come up with some further amendments to our laws, but it is time-bound, and it had to be completed by midnight of yesterday or of this morning. And so based on that...
Or this morning?
Yes. And that is why, to midnight, of course.
Okay.
And that is why you had the Speaker actually saying that this is a process that must end.
Speaker of the Senate, because we had two houses here.
Yes, Speaker of the Senate.
Yes.
It must end by midnight. And so that's how they proceeded, just to vote in his absence.
Wakili Willie Sotieno, together with your closing remarks, it's very interesting what our lawyer in studio is saying. He's saying we had timelines, and the House needed to beat timelines. He's saying there is no provisions for extensions whatsoever, even as you're arguing that the former deputy president should have been given time. Some are now calling him out for being absent as a chief witness. So what do you make of those two arguments, saying the questions of prejudice? However, according to our lawyer here, you cannot extend these timelines, and it was indeed important for the executive to move with speed.
You know, what I must say is this. The timelines that are being referred to were not timelines that related to the impeachment vote itself. If you look at Article 145(6) of the Constitution, it requires the Senate to conduct an investigation within 10 days. It requires the Senate to conduct an investigation within 10 days. So the 10 days being referred to was 10 days of investigation. Then at the end of the investigation, there is no timeline, the period within which the vote should have been taken. And 145(6), and it seems many Kenyans are not reading it, required that once the investigation is concluded, the report is tabled before the Senate. In this particular case, the Senate itself converted itself to become the main committee. So the Senate ought to have prepared a report. And then in that report, they make their recommendations. Then they invite Rigathi Gachagua to appear in person and for him to be heard as captured in Article 145(6) of the Constitution. In this particular instance, the Senate, for whatever reason, decided to assume that the 10 days that is for investigation is the 10 days to investigate and to make a determination. That is a misreading of the Constitution and far from it. And further, even those timelines which are set out in the Constitution, they are administrative timelines, guidelines, but you cannot read one part of the Constitution to be superior to another, unless you are talking about absolute rights. Article 25 of the Constitution sets out the rights which are deemed to be absolute. Absolute to the extent that nobody, not even the Constitution, can ever take them away. One of those rights is the right to a fair hearing. The Constitution already says that Gachagua or the DP is entitled to a fair hearing. He must be heard. And that right cannot be taken away by exigencies of time, that you're in a hurry, you're in a rush to conclude an impeachment motion. They ought to have given him time to appear before them and to respond to their report recommending for his impeachment before they take the vote. That crucial step was not taken up by the Senate, and the Senate, in my view, misread the Constitution. And any Kenyan who has a copy of the Constitution can read Article 145 and Article 150. It is very clear on that process. There is nowhere that their timeline of the vote must be taken within 10 days. It is investigations that must be done and concluded within 10 days.
But you have heard Wakili joining us virtually saying the timelines you are probably referring to, if I'm wrong, you could clarify, are not really absolute. There are administrative guidelines, and the Senate should have known better, according to him, to allow those 10 days of investigations, all right, and then give the former, if you will, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, even if he was really, really ill, get himself together and defend himself, even as they did their due diligence for 10 days. So is it the same timelines you're referring to, saying we have no provision to extend?
Yes, of course. The same. I think
you're talking about the same.
Maybe our interpretation is different.
Okay.
Yeah, but the process could not have gone on beyond midnight, the midnight of this morning or last night. That is what the Constitution provides for.
Which are you talking about, the same Article 145.6 and Article 150 that Willis Otieno has invoked?
Yes, when you look at Article...
Yes?
When you look at what my learned friend has invoked,
yes.
Let me take you back to the time when the whole process started. Mm-hmm. When the matter was first of all reported to the National Assembly, whereafter they forwarded it over to the Senate.
Yes.
The process started, and when you look at what transpired was that each party were given an opportunity to give up their opening statements and present their witnesses and all that. So the time started running. Up to now, the moment where now the Speaker did inform all the senators and all the parties that this is the time or the day that we are marked for the Deputy President's defense. And when you look at what transpired is that the advocates appeared, mm-hmm. and they were ready. Mm-hmm. And then they said, we don't seem to be in touch with our client. Give us time to find out.
Did you realize, though, or observe that there was an attempt by the Speaker of the Senate to give a bit of an extension?
Of course. As Speaker
yes.
of the Senate, he had to be balanced and basically demonstrate that he's had both sides. But you see, at the end of the day, it is the Senate that carries on that particular dispensation of impeachment. And when you look at the ruling that the Speaker came up with,
yes,
I believe the ruling was quite informed. And it covered all the areas that my learned friend is referring to. And they say this process must proceed.
This process must proceed. I want to go back to Wakili, of course, Willis Otieno. And there are arguments, however, Wakili, even as you respond, on how immediate it was that the Senate acts, the National Assembly gets to vote, and a nominee is forwarded to the House for voting. This is what they say, that the National Assembly needed to vote on the nominee today, and it is risky to have a vacancy in this position of a deputy president for a prolonged period of time. It is important to ensure there is no gray area in the event of succession, and I hope you're with me, Wakili. A vacuum can create a constitutional or national crisis. The deputy president is a mandatory member of the cabinet and the National Security Council. So they're saying having a Moi style, they're referring it to that way, vacancy is not not tenable, not today, not in the Kenya we have now. In fact, the argument, Wakili Willis Otieno, is that President William Ruto will also, be able to, unable to attend important international meetings, and Kenya may renege on its international obligations. And also, they say procedural or administrative delays will or could only heighten tensions at a time when life needs to get back to normal. They said Kenyans need to move forward. Now, even with our lawyer here and Wakili, as you respond, is this not justifiable enough to know that we did not have to miss out on our international obligations, including having the president move as he should, and that we needed some, concern on the procedural and administrative delays that might just heighten tensions in the country? We have a lot of things that we need to handle as a country. Do you not see these as one of the justifiable needs for the executive and the legislature to have acted as they have?
That is gaslighting. That is pure gaslighting. The Constitution will not have a constitutional crisis if we don't have a deputy president. Moi led us here for 14 months without a deputy president, and the country was functioning. So the fact that we are going through a legal process and in which the Constitution seems to be ignored does not mean that there's a crisis. In fact, the crisis is that we are actually brutalizing the Constitution. That should be the immediate concern to any Kenyan who cares about this country, that we are witnessing the political class butchering and massacring the Constitution to achieve their own political objectives. Even if we don't like Rigathi Gachagua, and I don't like him, I don't agree with his politics, but he's entitled to a right to be heard. He's entitled to the due process of the law, and is entitled to get a fair hearing through that process. He's entitled to all the protections that the Constitution has given him as a deputy president or as a citizen in the first instance. So that what we should be focusing on is that, are we being faithful to our Constitution? Are we playing fidelity to our Constitution? Or are we trying to sacrifice the Constitution in the altar of political expediency? That is what we are seeing, still seems to be doing at this particular point. And we are only saying that give Gachagua his day in court, give him an opportunity to present his entire case, and it's not right to say that his lawyers were there and they had made his opening statement, that their statement was going to be prejudiced. No. The Senate proceedings were meant to be investigatory. And if a person who is an adverse decision is going to be made is not present before the investigations committee, it is not about the National Assembly examining him. It's about him presenting his case and trying to persuade the senators and other Kenyans to listen to what his case is and to reach a determination whether it is fair for the National Assembly to have impeached him or not, or pass the motion of impeachment or not. So we need to be very careful. In this political process, we are going to witness a lot of political gaslighting. People being told about international obligations. What are those international obligations that the president needs to do when he travels out of the country has ever achieved to this country in the first place? There's nothing. Our Constitution is superior to those international partners or those international meetings that it seems the president now needs to attend to. We must pay homage to our Constitution.
All right, now I will take a break, gentlemen, but when we come back, we need to again clarify on the order stay. Now, the argument is that this particular stay order was speaking to the impeachment. It was speaking to a process that was done and dusted. And the question is it overtaken by events? If not, what is the implication of this stay order? If it wasn't honored by the House that should have, does it have anything to do with the voting? Did it have anything to do with the president giving out a name as a nominee? But so far what we have right now, after of course, the voting in Parliament, we had absentia, nil. We had noes coming to none, and the members of Parliament that voted yes for the now, according to the news we have, the new Deputy President-elect, Professor Kithure Kindiki, as the new elect. They voted at 236 members. Keep staying with us and sending in your feedback as well. After this commercial break, I'll still be here with Swaka and Willis Otieno.